that. I used to actually miserable. So over the years of meditation, of EFT, acupressure tapping, of spiritual practice, of reading inspirational books, I've been able to totally shift my experience to now having this feeling of moving from that great connection with the universe we can feel when we're in sleep, when we're in that deep delta brainwave state of dreamless sleep, and then moving from that place of inspiration into the day with that same wonderful, powerful energy.
I love that. And what, like you mentioned several different things that you've done to create that. What is, would you say like your daily, is it reading the books? Is it meditation? Is it exercise? Is it learning from somebody? What is it, the most powerful piece of your day that creates this kind of feeling?
Well, in my book, Mind to Matter, I talk quite a bit about flow states, and we've all experienced flow states, often spontaneously. You're in the forest and suddenly you feel the stillness and connection with nature. Maybe you're at the ocean and suddenly you have this transcendent moment. Maybe you're in a church or a place of worship or a temple and suddenly you feel something greater than yourself. Sometimes it's completely spontaneous in the middle of a crowd. But all of us have had those moments of flow. And there are two basic paths into flow. One is from meditation, so getting really still, you can enter that flow state. And the second way into flow is through exercise. So the runner's high is an example of that. People do exercise and they feel this state of flow. And so there are many different flow triggers, many paths into flow. The two that I find the most effective for people are the ones I mentioned already. One is meditation. Meditation is the ancient way of getting into flow. And the second way of achieving those states, I think, is really worthwhile, is EFT, acupressure tapping, emotional freedom technique. So to simply pressure tapping on acupressure points, because when you're annoyed, when you're unbalanced, when you're ungrounded, when you have any negative emotion, releasing that from your energy system is really powerful. And so we, in our nonprofit, we work with veterans with PTSD. We work with people who've survived really terrible personal tragedies, and all of that psychological trauma just goes away when you use those techniques. So those are the two that I use personally. I think are the most, really the basics in the human toolkit is acupressure and meditation.
So Dawson, the term acupressure and tapping is brand new to my audience. We have not talked about that with anybody. And I know that you are, and I said it in the intro for people listening, you brought it to the mainstream. You made it real, I guess you could say, right? Tapping. And I actually have a friend, Brittany Watkins. She does it for weight loss for people. She helps coach people through tapping, through weight loss. What are we stimulating? Like, what are we doing when we, and if you could explain what you mean by tapping, is it literally just like, or what are we doing?
Yeah, well, there are, in traditional acupuncture charts, there are 12 energy meridians. So you have these 360 or so acupuncture points in your body. If you go see an acupuncturist, they'll do a little bit of diagnosis. They'll put a needle in on one or more acupuncture points. But needling is only one way of stimulating those points. Another way is tapping. So there are lots of tapping routines. Qigong has been tapping on acupuncture points for over 2,000 years. And shiatsu, Japanese finger massage, uses tapping or rubbing on the points. And so with EFT, we simply stimulate, we tap each of the 12 meridians while we're thinking about a negative memory, a negative belief, negative event, any kind of emotional upset. And what happens then is you feel the upset, you feel the energy, you think of the bad thing that happened. And then at the same time, you are stimulating all 12 energy meridians, and usually there's some kind of release and balancing. And so, for example, we've done this with over 20,000 veterans over the last 12 years in our nonprofit. And one of them came in, terrible memories of Vietnam, and he had one memory that he had just been haunting him for 40 years since Vietnam, which was of his best friend getting killed by a sniper. And he'd been walking on patrol with his friend that day, and every day they went out on patrol together, and usually he was on the right, his friend was on the left. But that particular day, he was on the left, his friend was on the right. They had switched positions. So for 40 years, he'd had this story in his head that he took the bullet meant for me. and he had PTSD, symptoms like hypervigilance and insomnia. He never slept through the night. He rarely slept for more than 90 minutes at a stretch. He had terrible nightmares. He had intrusive thoughts. And so he then worked on this memory, remembering the details of the event. And there were, I won't go into the details here because, I mean, they're really emotionally triggering of his friend's death. But so he's been replaying the script in his mind now for 40 years. And in psychology, we call this re-traumatization. You're thinking about the car crash, you're thinking about the childhood abuse, thinking about the bullying, thinking about the failure, and then that sends signals through those neural pathways. You reawaken them again, and then you get more traumatized. But when you tap, what we find is that in MRI studies and EEG studies looking at brain function, if people are thinking, say, about the death of the best friend in Vietnam, or about the car crash when they were 12, or about the divorce, or about the financial crisis, whatever it is that bothers them, the emotional brain, the emotional part of the brain, the limbic system, the midbrain, gets highly aroused. So in an MRI, you see that middle part of the brain, the hippocampus, the hypothalamus, the thalamus, the amygdala, that part of the brain gets all lit up when you think about these negative events in your life, like in this case, his best friend being killed by a sniper.
Yeah.
And then when you tap and regulate the body's energies with acupressure, you'll see in an MRI, a brain scanner, or an EEG, you'll see the emotional brain quieten down. So afterwards, when we talk to that person later, a week later, a month later, a year later, we've done follow-ups that are as long as 2 years, they remember the event, but they no longer have the emotional response to the event. So the memory stays intact, but the emotional tagging to it in the limbic system in the midbrain goes away. And so that's what we do, the tapping, and what happens in the body, which is that the emotional attachment, the emotional signaling around that negative event just goes away.
It almost sounds like it just breaks it off, like those, whatever fibers were holding it together, it kind of detaches itself from it. Because the memory is never going to go away, right?
No, and that's called pruning. That's a process called pruning. And it's really amazing. So I have these images on my website, in my books, of how quickly our neurons connect. And I have one amazing electron microscope image. In 12 seconds, these two tendrils and two neurons, they're moving toward each other fairly slowly like this. And gradually you see them move together. And then eventually they do this handshake. And these two neurons actually join like this as the synapses come together. And the whole sequence in real time is 12 seconds long. You're literally building new synapses like that. But if you don't signal through those neurons again, and so for example, you've been sending these signals through that synaptic connection for years and years and years. It's a really big, strong connection with a lot of neurons there.
Yeah.
If you stop doing it, if you stop being angry, stop being resentful, stop blaming, stop having all this negative emotion, within 3 weeks, those neurons start to just move apart again, and those neural connections, those neural pathways in the brain, literally disintegrate.
What? So, and tapping in the correct way helps with this, like helps speed up, I guess, the separation of those neurons.
Yeah, it does.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So PTSD, what other types, anxiety, stress, those are the two biggest situations people go through. Does it help with that? Can it do something as simple as like learning how to stop biting your nails?
I actually worked with a psychiatrist at one point, and I do a lot of live workshops, and so at a live workshop, the psychiatrist showed up, and there was this problem. He said, "I'm 45 years old. I'm a psychiatrist. For goodness sakes, if I can't fix myself, who can fix me? Certainly not this guy called Dawson Church. He's not even a psychiatrist. He's just a life coach. How can he possibly fix me?" So the psychiatrist was really skeptical about whether I can do it or not.
Yeah.
And I now have a testimonial on my website with him letting me use his full real name. And it's like, it took about 12 minutes, less than 15 minutes, and that was it. We did some tapping on it. He never bit his nails again.
That's incredible. That's so cool. That was just a random question, and obviously you have a case study for it. That's cool. That's really neat. I want to go back to meditation. What does your practice look like today?
It's evolved over the years, and Justin, initially, my practice was ineffective. I joined a spiritual community when I was 15 years old. I was really, when I was 15, as a result of childhood events, I was just psychologically and spiritually, I was a mess. So I wanted to be happier. I wanted to fix myself. So I joined a spiritual community, learned to meditate, learned energy healing, read the great tradition, the great scriptures of the world, and it made a little bit of a difference. But I had a problem common to people who've been traumatized, which is that when I closed my eyes, I would have memories of the bad stuff in my life. So you close your eyes, and then pictures of past tragedies and traumas flood your brain. And so when you close your eyes and start to try and meditate, if you have trauma, two parts of the brain become active. One is the mid-prefrontal cortex right behind your eyebrows. The other is the posterior cingulate cortex back here. And together, those two nodes are the centers of what's called the default mode network of the brain. That's the network the brain defaults to when you aren't doing a task. So with your eyes open and doing stuff, other parts of the brain called the task positive network are active, and you don't tend to worry about too much about the past or the future. But when you close your eyes and get still, actually, that for traumatized people is when the default mode network comes on and you start to do two things. The default mode network's job is to ruminate about the past, about to think about all the bad things, the hurts, the insults, the threats to your survival from the past, and to extrapolate those into the future. So not just about the person who hurt me yesterday, but the person who might hurt me tomorrow. Those are the two jobs of the default mode network, is to think about those things. And so that's what I would do. I would sit there at 15, 18 years old in the ashram, trying to meditate and be thinking about the bad stuff from the past and the bad stuff that might happen in the future. And of course, in terms of evolutionary biology, this is really valuable. You want to be, I mean, if you're the caveman 10,000 years ago, you want to be thinking about the lion that almost ate you yesterday and the lion that might eat you tomorrow. So really, that's why the brain defaults to thinking that way when you close your eyes. But for modern people without those threats, it's profoundly dysfunctional, leads to all kinds of diseases. So that's what happened to me when I was young. Gradually over the years, I learned better techniques. And then eventually, when I was in my 40s, I began to meditate every day. And I looked at all the best techniques, mindfulness and ways of being mindful, at biofeedback, neurofeedback, because biofeedback's really objective. It's not like closing my eyes and telling you I'm peaceful. It's hooking you up to electrodes, and I will tell you if you're peaceful. I can see exactly what's going on in your brain when you're hooked up to an EEG or in an MRI. And so I began to use biofeedback, neurofeedback techniques from some really advanced researchers. I began to use some heart math techniques. I began to use EFT tapping, and I combined all of these in a simple package because most people try and meditate, have a hard time, and give up. I combine these in a very simple package I called EcoMeditation, which is based on hard science. There's 7 steps to it. Every single step is based on multiple studies. And so it wasn't just imaginary instructions from, close your eyes and try and still your mind. It's like, breathe in this rhythm, relax this muscle, sit in this way, do this, do that, do the next. It's very mechanical. There's no spirituality in it at all. And so an atheist can be as happy doing meditation as the most devout religious person. So you sit there, you do these things. And so for me now, I do these things, and it puts you into this elevated emotional state really fast. So you'll find literally huge numbers of testimonials of people who've tried this, who've read Mind to Matter. Just look at it on Amazon, look at all the 5-star reviews. People say, I tried this, and suddenly for the first time in my life, I can meditate. One woman said, Dawson, I've tried and failed every other meditation technique. I'm a busy single mom. When I sat down to try eco-meditation, my brain said, you'll never be able to do this. You've never been able to meditate. I just followed the 7 simple steps, and tears of bliss began to roll down my cheeks, and I was in that state I've aspired to all this time. And then she says in her review, she says, I will be doing this meditation every day. And Justin, I can't tell you how much that means to me to hear that somebody is now doing meditation every day, because I know if they do it for only 8 weeks, their brain is changing. If they do it for 8 months or a year, they are doing substantial neural remodeling. So personally, I do it every morning, I do it every day, and you feel wonderful. No one has to convince you to do it. Once you've felt that high, you want to feel that good every single day.
Dawson, I love everything you just said. And you hit it really strongly at the end when you said you love that she's now meditating every day, because as a newfound teacher, right, and someone that's been a daily meditator a year and a half or so, I can't tell you how much I wish that I could just let everybody know the power and the impact and the difference you feel when you meditate. And that's, so we all of us, you, me, we want more people to be meditating. And it's amazing that you brought that up. I love that. You briefly touched, Dawson, on the 7, I think this is what you were talking about, the 7 neurochemicals of ecstasy. You said the number 7, I'm assuming, but you didn't use that exact phrase. They're released in our brain during deep meditation. I wanted to ask you 2 things. What I mean, I don't know if it's interesting enough to ask, what are these neurochemicals, but like how they help us, and then how do we get into a deep meditation? My teaching, what I've learned is mantras help me get into a deep state. What have you found?
Well, I've been working on a new book called Bliss Brain because I've really been digging deep into those topics. And in Bliss Brain, I distinguish between different styles of meditation. And so mantras is one of the 7 styles of meditation. They work extremely well for some people. For other people, following the breath works best. For some people, following their thoughts works, letting go of thoughts works best. For some people, moving meditations like Qigong, Tai Chi, yoga work better than static meditation. So there are 7 different styles, and I think that meditation is it's like saying sports. I love sports. Well, what do you like? You like, baseball, rugby, soccer, tennis. What sport? There are a lot of different sports. So meditation is like saying the word sports. You want to get specific about what exactly you prefer. And I advocate trying different styles of meditation. EcoMeditation, though, is just borrowing bits and pieces of evidence-based meditations and then putting them all together. So it's really easy for novices. And occasionally there's someone who says, I couldn't do it, didn't work for me. But what it does is it triggers these 7 neurochemicals of ecstasy. And I won't talk about all of them, but one of the important ones is oxytocin. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. And so it's what triggers labor contractions in mothers when they're giving birth. When people touch or hug, especially if they hug for a few moments, then they generate these big surges of oxytocin. Social contact with people you're close to generates oxytocin. But monks and nuns, people who meditate a lot and who are having transcendent experiences, are having these surges of oxytocin. And so they're falling in love, they're being in love, they're having this experience of emotional intimacy, but not with another human being, with the infinite. And so now you're having these surges of this pleasurable neurochemical. 2 others that we have surges of are serotonin and dopamine. And serotonin is the reason serotonin is so pleasurable is it gives you a feeling of satisfaction, while dopamine gives you a feeling of reward. So dopamine is your reward neurochemical, serotonin is your satisfaction neurochemical, and you get these from other substances as well, like psilocybin from magic mushrooms has the same chemical structure as serotonin. So when it docks with those receptors in your brain, you feel high. THC from marijuana is docking with the same chemical receptors in your brain as one of your endogenous homemade in your brain neurochemicals, anandamide. So the reason you get high from marijuana is that it's mimicking the effects of anandamide. So when you meditate effectively, you're having these surges of dopamine, which is, again, similar to cocaine. So you're having this cocaine type of experience, surges of dopamine, surges of oxytocin, surges of anandamide, all the serotonin, and you feel completely blissful. You also, after eco-meditation, you feel totally stoned. So my wife and I finish our eco-meditation in the morning, and we sit and talk to each other for a while, because it takes us a while to come back down to earth. And then We have to go to email. We have to go be in meetings. We have to work with clients. We have to do stuff. So you can't do that when you're just high as a kite after all these neurochemicals have been flooding through your brain. But I become really interested in the mechanics of this in effective meditation.
Yeah.
So in effective meditation, when you're meditating effectively, you're generating all this neurochemistry of addiction. And that's why if you meditate well, if you do succeed in unleashing all these things, I mean, who wouldn't want to have a brain full of all of these great neurochemicals and feeling so good? So that's why people like this woman say, I'm going to do it again. Another woman at a workshop of mine was a psychotherapist, and she said similar thing. I was able to meditate effectively, so I made a resolution, Dawson, that I would meditate every single day for 90 days using EcoMeditation. And again, I was just grateful to hear that she'd made that commitment to 90 days of doing it. And I asked her, I said, well, what day are you on right now? She said, oh, I'm on day 152. So she finished the 90 days. She kept on doing it because you just feel so incredibly good after doing it. You want to do it again and again and again. So that's what I do. That's what now, Justin, you won't believe the amount of traffic we're getting to the meditation page on our website. We're getting like 30, 50,000 organic search hits every month. People just finding this and trying it. I mean, they aren't doing anything. One Iraq veteran said, I went to Japan and was in a Zen monastery after Iraq trying to cure my PTSD. And I just stumbled across your website on a random search, tried it, and bingo, I was there. So it's absurdly easy, and it really works, and it's addictive.
So cool. Yeah. So on your website is where we can find about the eco meditation.
Yeah. I just put up a new EcoMeditation as well, aimed to focus on improving immunity, because we did two studies in the last couple of years published in medical journals. One was that showed that if you're doing EcoMeditation for an intensive weekend, and this was people at a retreat center, and they were doing EcoMeditation the whole both days, and they were also tapping quite a bit, and their levels of the antibody that actually protects your cells from the coronavirus, the levels of that immune antibody rose by 27% in just 48 hours. So we've been really focused for the last while on getting immune-based meditations out there. In a second study we did, people were doing it for a week. They were tapping, meditating for a whole week at a retreat center, and their levels of those immune antibodies, that again, what they do is these antibodies stop the spikes of coronaviruses from adhering to your cells. They're called antigens, and so they neutralize those. And the levels of those antibodies rose by 113%, more than doubled in just 1 week of tapping and EcoMeditation. So we've been really focused on getting those meditations out there. So we now have a free immunity-focused EcoMeditation on our website.
I'll have to definitely check that out. I love trying new techniques, new meditations, and seeing how I feel with them. That's awesome. And I mean, it doesn't just protect you against, it doesn't just raise those levels that protect us against coronavirus, but thousands of other viruses too, right? So I don't know if it was placebo effect or what, but I felt, go on. Sorry. Yeah, go. You keep going, please.
There are 7 coronaviruses that infect human beings. There are hundreds of different coronaviruses. Only 7, though, affect human beings, like MERS and SARS, and now COVID. 2 of them cause the common cold, cause kinds of colds. And they what they look like is they all have this circular body with these protein spikes sticking out of them. And so it's those spikes that adhere to the cell walls, and these immune antibodies stick to the spikes, stop them from sticking to our cell walls. So yeah, it's really, they're protective against the common cold as well.
It's just, it's amazing that these body and mind techniques and these energy that we create through tapping and through meditation can do things like this. And now science is proving it. And you're saying it over and over, and it's just, no matter how many times I hear it, it just really amazes my mind. And I'm so happy and grateful that I found it earlier, right? And that's what you're trying to do, is get people to realize the power of this early. And for people listening, the background behind him is like keeping me in such a good mindset. It says honor, hope, gratitude, friendliness, gentleness, fairness, faith, encouragement. I mean, that's so cool that you have that, by the way. I had to have people listening know that. So what I didn't get a chance to dive completely into this book yet, but is this, if I read Mind to Matter, is that also going to talk about the eco meditation? Am I going to learn a lot about that too? Okay,
Yeah,
good.
we have a free eco meditation at the end of each chapter. And so the end of each
Ah,
chapter has what's called deepening practices and extended play resources. And so you get free links to videos
sweet.
and audio tracks. Like I made a companion eco meditation, one for each week of each chapter of Mind to Matter. And so they're short, they're about 15 minutes long, they're not very long. But again, people using them have really had profound experiences.
Awesome. I love when you can read something and actually you implement it, right? There's tools to implement what we're learning. So that's awesome. Does this have anything to do with, you mentioned blissful brain a few times, the 5 practices that retrain your brain for positivity? Because I think that's so important, especially with so much going on negative in the world and around us. It's so easy to get lost in it. How do we retrain our brains to focus more on the positive?
What I talk about in Mind to Matter is the whole idea of non-local mind. And so the first chapter, introduction, and the last chapter is all focused on non-local mind. And so many of us are embedded in local mind. And I need my local mind because, like, to drive my car, I need to be in my local mind. To go make a sandwich, I need to be in my local mind. Or have a cup of coffee, or sweep my porch, I need to have a local mind. So
Sure.
having a mind and a functioning mind and a brain is really handy. And it's also really worth remembering that it's only one dimension of your being. And so I begin and end Mind to Matter with a focus on non-local mind. And that is what is connecting you to the universe. So what the meditator does is you have these surges of oxytocin, you feel one with, and the parietal lobe of your brain shuts down. So you aren't feeling one with another human being or another material person. You're feeling one with the universe, and you're merging in meditation with non-local mind. So for a little while, for that half hour or 45 minutes or maybe longer than an hour, you're sitting there in meditation and you're letting go of all the worry, all the preoccupations of your local life. And if you look at MRIs, like I just finished an MRI study with some colleagues, and the default mode network, that part of the brain that has you focus on yourself and your local being, that part of the brain shuts down. So now I'm no longer embedded in my local mind. I'm becoming one with non-local mind. Now, the moment that happens, I'm feeling one with the universe. I feel much better. I just know that nature is taking its course, that there are cycles, there are seasons, there are all the ebbs and flows of nature, and that most of the world is actually doing well. So I let go of my little self, I join with the great self, and in that great self, in that non-local mind, there is so much love, Justin. There's so much kindness, there's compassion, there's vision, there's wisdom, there's knowledge. I then download that all into my local life. So how's that way to start the day? If you start the day and you look at your phone and you look at your screen and you read the news, then all of that bad news is flooding into your local mind and making you feel terrible. It drives your cortisol up, it drives your immunoglobulin antibodies down, it makes you feel subjectively worse. But if instead you wake up in the morning and you let go of your local self and you blend, you merge with non-local mind, you have what the mystics experienced of letting go of the suffering, small, self-preoccupied being you think you are most of the day, and you simply spend that hour in bliss with the universe, then when you move into the day, there are studies I talk about in both Mind to Matter and my new book, Bliss Brain, that show that when you move into your day, when you then go to the office, when you then jump on a Zoom call with some teammates, when you then pick up the project you're working on, you're more productive, you're more creative, and you have greater problem-solving ability. In one study done by the Defense Department, they had people moving into these elevated states of oneness with the universe, flow states, being in flow, and then coming from those into their real outer responsibilities and doing stuff, doing tasks. And they found that their ability to solve complex problems went up by 490%, an almost five-fold increase in the ability to solve complex problems. Another flow state study by McKinsey, a 10-year study of peak performers, found that after you've been into that state of oneness, you've been into flow, you then come back to ordinary reality, you start doing your job, you're 5 times as productive as you are in regular reality. So meditation and these inner states aren't just feel-good states where you're drifting off into this mystical space and then coming back and being ineffective in the world. You're up to 5 times as effective in the outside world after you've been in that state of connection with non-local mind. So that's what you want to orient yourself to every morning. Don't orient yourself to all the chaos and confusion in the world. When this chaos is gone, there'll be more chaos to replace it. The new sites will not get any shorter or smaller when the current crisis is over. They will be the same length. There'll be some other crisis to worry about. But if you orient yourself to non-local mind, then you have all of the wonder, the bliss, the joy of the universe, and you carry that forward into ordinary life.
Yeah. And I mean, why wouldn't we want this? And then when you do see the issues and what's going on, you have a whole different perspective of how you can contribute in a much higher vibrancy way than like playing small and playing little, right? And that's where you're talking about, and that's why it's beautiful. It reminds me of, for like anybody reading the scriptures or old text, it reminds me kind of Atman and Brahman a little bit, like our individual spiritual self, and then Brahman, which is like one with the universe, right? Is that kind of what you're explaining, and just in different terms?
Yeah. And all mystical traditions have this as their core. They have various ways of explaining this state. And so at the core of every religion is somebody, a woman, a man, who did this, who was able to let go of the suffering self. They then move into oneness with non-local mind, and they come back changed. When the Buddha emerged after he'd been under the Bodhi tree and spent a whole night wrestling with all these demons, and the demons threw the worst kinds of stuff they could at him, and he just stayed totally centered in non-local mind. And when he finally got up from the Bodhi tree and began to walk around, people could tell he was completely changed. And they said to him, "Are you a god? Who are you? Are you a divine being?" And he said, "I am awake." And that's the challenge. That's the work of all of us, is to live awake. We want to live awake, not being mesmerized, hypnotized by this world of one crisis, one problem. This crisis goes away, the next crisis crops up. Be awake, live and enjoy all the beauty of the world. There is so much beauty and awe and wonder. When I finish meditating in the mornings, I start to give thanks. And the first thing I give thanks for is my breath. Sometimes I'm just crying tears of gratitude just that I get to breathe air. I mean, you're grateful for every cell in your body, for every atom in the universe. You are so filled with love in those states. Now, of course, are we in a chaotic world? Absolutely we are. But we are effective human beings in that chaotic world. We're making a difference, and a positive difference in the world all around us. In Mind to Matter, I talk about emotional contagion, about how we are emotionally as contagious as the virus. And that one person, one happy person, one positive person can affect the lives of literally hundreds of people. We affect people next to us. If you're happy, your next door neighbor is 35% more likely to be happy. His next door neighbor is 15% more likely to be happy. And his next door neighbor is likely to be 6% more happy if you're happy. There's an emotionally contagious effect. In one study on Facebook, the researchers were able to produce emotional contagion in 680,000 people in 1 week by tweaking their feeds in a negative or positive way. We are amazingly emotionally contagious to each other. And if you're centered and loving and compassionate and altruistic, then you are just spreading that all around you.
Did you guys hear that? That was gold right there. I mean, that was one of those aha moments in a podcast. Your attitude affects your neighbor. So if you're happy 35%, that neighbor 15%, the next one 6%, and so on and so on. And even that when it gets down to 1% or 0.2%, that makes a world of difference in somebody's life. So we use the term ripple effect, right? That ripple, that contagious effect. Wow, that's powerful stuff. And there you're talking about actual studies. Like, this isn't just spitting in the wind. These are actual studies that you guys did. Facebook did. I mean, that's now. Did the people on Facebook know that they were being studied or no?
No, what the researchers did was they were just slightly tweaking their feeds to give them a little bit more or a little bit less, like maybe one more news story in a whole slew of stories that had a darker emotional tone to it, or a lighter one. And they then, when they were affected by that, they began to infect other people as well. So yeah, there are over 400 studies that are summarized in Mind to Matter. There are also stories of people, like there are healing stories, there are money stories, people just making money after they change their minds, people's health improving dramatically. One woman who read the book and took this to heart, she was diagnosed shortly after that with stage 4 metastasized on the top of her right breast over here, and it had spread to her right armpit, and all the lymph nodes under her right armpit were inflamed full of cancer cells, and they were then in danger of spreading throughout her whole body through her lymph nodes. And so she said, when she got the diagnosis, the cancer treatment center said we wanted to start chemotherapy and radiation right away. She said, before I do that, I'm going to take a step back and use energy and see what I can do for my body with energy, just energy treatments. So she began to get energy medicine treatments. She began to tap more. She really got serious about meditation. She stopped watching the news. She got rid of all the negative people in her life. She turned her life around, changed her diet. She went down to Mexico, got some laetrile therapy and some hyperbaric oxygen. So she did this alternative stuff, and she changed her energy. She went back to the clinic 8 weeks later, just 8 weeks later, and the tumor had shrunk from 2 inches, 5 centimeters, to about a third of that size. And all of the lymph nodes under her right armpit were clear. A couple months after that, she had a biopsy, a blood biopsy. There was not a trace of cancer in her body. And all she'd done was shift her energy. So these techniques, I mean, there are so many stories like that of people healing from depression and all kinds of other psychological and physical conditions, just shifting their consciousness up here. So these are powerful healing techniques, Justin, as well as making you feel much better.
Yeah, and for people that, like, you can't argue that there's the proof is there. Like, that's it. These studies, and I've heard this so many times. And Dawson, thank you for taking the time and taking the energy and to research these studies and share them and show them. And man, it's just like I'm in awe of a lot of what you're saying. And obviously, years and years of cultivating this has allowed you to share it. When does your new book come out? I know I pre-ordered it, but do you know when it comes out?
Comes out in September. And so while Mind to Matter is really focused on manifest, the whole idea of our brains creating material reality, because the Buddha said, with our minds, we create the world. And in Proverbs in the Bible, it says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Ralph Waldo Emerson said, with our thoughts, we make the world. Gandhi said the same thing. I mean, all these great authorities have been telling us this. And I was a little bit skeptical as a researcher. I thought, well, do we really do that? And then I realized that, hey, well, I'm creating cortisol or immunoglobulins in my body. I'm making molecules all the time. I've done several studies of gene expression. I'm literally turning genes on and off in my body by my thoughts. So that part was easy to prove. But the freaky thing in Mind to Matter was that as I began to look at research into our minds changing stuff outside of our bodies, we're doing it all the time. We're producing emotional change in people. So if I'm negative, I'm not just driving my cortisol high, I'm making cortisol molecules inside my neighbor's body by being negative to him. and he was passing along to his neighbor, who I don't even know. So we're literally making molecules out there in the world. We're making molecules in water all the time. There's research showing that if I have an intention toward water, toward a container of water, that it literally changes the bonding angle between the hydrogen and oxygen atoms in that water. This is showing we're literally changing the bonding angle, the molecular structure of water with thought. So, I mean, that research blew me out of the water. I was just so crazy amazed to read that stuff and talk about it in Mind to Matter. And then I began to notice that as I was meditating and doing all these meditations in my books, that I was getting happier and happier and happier. And then I learned about Ananda Mind, the bliss molecule. So in Mind to Matter, I have a section on Ananda Mind. And it's called Ananda because Ananda is the Sanskrit word for bliss. And if you have a lot of this molecule in your brain, you feel seriously happy. And you generate this molecule in deep meditation. So I wrote about it in Mind to Matter. But then I took a deep dive in the new book, Bliss Brain. I said, let's look at Ananda Mind. Then I thought, well, let's look at serotonin. Let's look at dopamine. Let's look at oxytocin. And so I talk about all those neurochemicals in the new book. Again, lots of stories, lots of science, but also lots of brain change. And it turns out that if you do this stuff, the anatomy of your brain begins to change in 8 weeks. If you're meditating effectively for 8 weeks, only half an hour a day, even less, we can detect, using MRIs, substantial changes in your brain. And in a study I just finished with some colleagues, hasn't been published yet, but it's a randomized controlled trial of people doing EcoMeditation for a month. And in only a month, their suffering part of the brain, the mid-prefrontal cortex, shut down. So after just a little while of EcoMeditation, they could shut down their prefrontal cortex, and the insula, a part of the brain to do with compassion, lit up. Now, we've seen this effect in many other studies of other people. So this was not an unknown result we predicted. We would find this in this EcoMeditation study. But the other studies that show that the mid-prefrontal cortex shuts down and the insula lights up, they are of Tibetan monks with 10 to 20,000 lifetime hours of meditation practice. Those guys can shut down their mid-prefrontal cortex and light up their compassionate insula. They can do it very quickly. But we showed that with EcoMeditation, you can take novices who haven't meditated before and train them to have the same brain configuration as those Tibetan masters, and you can have them do that in 1 month.
Crazy. One of the things I think about lately is because, diving so deep into it, Dawson, well, first off, how much longer do you have?
I have to go in 5 minutes.
Okay. I was going to say, what's taken us so long to realize all of this, I guess, but maybe it's science, number one, because people need to see proof, right, before they can start really, really cultivating it. But we won't get into that today. I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody, and I want to make sure I ask you, is if you could go back, okay, we've learned a lot today from you. So just a simple thing, if you could go back to your 18-year-old self and your 18-year-old self would listen, what advice or what would you say to him today?
What a great and provocative question, Justin. Well, I think I was suicidal when I was 18. I was so anxious, depressed, and miserable. I wanted to kill myself half the time. And
You would never know that talking to you now. Holy.
I know. I was so wretchedly unhappy for so many years. It's like, I wrote this book called Bliss Brain, but while I was writing Bliss Brain too, we had a wildfire in Northern California right after I finished Mind to Matter. My house burned down, and then I got a hernia from all the stuff around the fire and trying to recover from the fire. We had a huge financial crash after that too, because our office burned down as well. So, and in that year, my house burned down. I had this major operation. I had this financial crisis, and through it all, I wrote a new book called Bliss Brain. So I would tell my 18-year-old self, don't worry, it all turns out fine. You survive, and life is good. You learn to be incredibly happy, and your deep unhappiness now is giving you the determination to find a better way and to heal. And that's a valuable gift, and you will heal. And I tell my 18-year-old self, just love yourself. Don't be so self-critical. Lighten up. Just get in the flow. Be in the flow.
Yeah.
Be in that state of love. It's all going to be fine. Look at the birds outside your window. They aren't sweating finding the next seed. Look at the, as Jesus said, look at the lilies of the field. They do not toil or spin or sow or reap, and yet they're beautiful and they're taken care of. So look at nature and just love yourself and be at peace, because all of these things you're worried about are never going to happen, and life turns out okay. This too shall pass. I think that's the message I have to
Yeah.
everybody. Love yourself and just be easy and gentle on yourself. Your life will be fine.
I love all that. And I think it's so cool that you could laugh at yourself for like all this stuff happening in my house burned. And I was like, let's write a book on bliss brain. It's all good. It's great. Thank you so much for your time, Dawson. I really appreciate it. I am going to be pushing this episode like crazy. It was so good. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Justin, thank you and bless you. It's been a real pleasure.